Step out of the shadows, feel the power rise. Catch the spark inside you, let your spirit fly. Beyond the chronic burnout, carol genes you'll guide. Find your steady rhythm, life's joy on the tide. Flourish forward, bright and bold. Leave the burnout far behind. In this journey, hearts unfold. Power's yours, seek and find.
You know, there are days that I show up, and I mean, there isn't a day that I don't love the show, that I don't love what I do, but there are days where I get super excited. And you know darn good and well, Philip, I'm super excited today because you're my favorite people. And I have
Oh,
been looking forward to this so much because you and I have so many areas that we overlap, and we have such a passion for serving our autistic community, connecting our autistic community, making sure that we have the resources and all of the things that we need to really thrive and have the most incredible well-being in our daily life. And so to have you here today is a real honor because not only, you know, I'm just like a huge fan of today's autistic moment, but I also have the swag. I've got my cup. Let me grab my cup here. Here we go. And I've got my pen. Hang on. There we go. Here's my cup. Here's my pen.
yep.
Because I am a super fan of today's autistic moment. So there y'all go. You know
Um,
something new about me.
uh, as long as this is video, I apologize to some of my audience, but my background here is a little crazy, but I'll do the best I can. So if I disappear a little bit, I'm still here. But
Hey, it's okay. As long
yeah.
as I can hear your voice, we're all good.
Yeah.
Philip, I mean, what would you say? Because I know when we were in the green room before we hit record, you were saying, because y'all just celebrated your 100th episode of today's Autistic Moment, which huge congratulations, my friend. That's a big milestone. But you were reflecting and sharing with me what today's Autistic Moment had actually given you. And I would love for the audience here at Beyond Chronic Burnout to hear that.
Yeah. Thanks for asking that question. And you know as well as I do that when you start a podcast of any kind, that you never really know where it's going to take you. You know, my podcast was a suggestion by a small business individual. Well, I was meeting with Woke Rehab, and they said the word podcast, and I couldn't get the word out of my head. And that's when some people started to say, "Oh, you have a good radio voice." I'm like, "That's news to me." Lots of that happened. And when today's Autistic Moment was launched in 2021, early 2021, it was awesome to get it finally up off the ground. And then the people who are just coming to me say, "I want to be on this show because I'm autistic and I've never had an opportunity to say what I want to say." And then when we got to the 50th show, and I had Scott and Becca coming on and saying, "Your podcast is a safe space for us to talk. Nobody's telling us to be quiet," and I'm glad of that. And then when I was working on my 100th show, and if you listen to that 100th show, you'll hear lots of clips from about 14 to 16 shows I did. It's a long episode, folks. It's about 2 hours, but you know what? 100th show, it's worth the 2 hours, believe me. And I was but as I was putting those things together, and then I was doing my listen through, I started to get emotional. I really did, because whatever the autistic community feels like I've been giving to them, they gave me back 100-fold. You know, it's so awesome that autistics came to me and trusted me to provide that safe space for them. I cannot tell you what a blessing that is in my own life. I'm just I am it gets me emotional because you and I both know what it is to try to fit into a community that's just you're not gonna get into. But when they came to me, I said, "I found my community. This is where I belong," and so I'm very grateful for that.
Oh, Philip, and we are so very grateful for you.
Thank you.
You have truly just sparkled and shined, and you are that lighthouse, that safe that safe place where we know we can go and where community is gathered.
Yeah.
And it's such a wonderful thing. I know that this year in 2025, today's autistic moment has what I consider a powerhouse theme. And
Mm,
I'm so excited for this because, this is something that's really near and dear to my heart because I talk about one of the biggest things that I do in the unveiling method and here at Whittington Wellbeing is to create and build that relationship with ourselves, that
mm,
truly authentic, beautiful relationship with ourselves. And part of that is stepping into our own leadership in
mhm,
our lives.
mm,
And your theme for this year in 2025 at today's autistic moment is the future of multidimensional autistic leadership. Tell me
mhm.
more about this. Oh my gosh.
Absolutely. Um, because of the year we're in, and I'm not going to name names because we're tired of hearing them. But the point is that, you know, I was trying to think of, a lot of us autistics in a year like this one, we have people saying things and justifying certain things that are just not helpful. And it's been kind of almost an expectation that we will just lie down, take it, and you fall apart and just, you know, collapse basically. Well, I began talking with AJ Locascio and Jessica Johns from Umbrella US, and we have partnered together and we came up, all right, autistics are multidimensional. What do we mean when we say that? And so Jessica, AJ, and I came up with autistics are neurological, we are physical. It, finding medical people who understand that is a real challenge. Uh, we are
No
cultural.
kidding, right?
Yeah, we're awareness, avoidance through masking. We are seeking, relational, personal, social, and engaging. You and I have both discovered that when we communicate with other autistics, we're engaged in our conversations, you know. And so, how do we transfer that, if you will, into leading in a time when all of our all of our intersectional communities are feeling squeeze? And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at all the various ways those multi dimensions help with leadership. Um, my audience is going to be hearing from Shalice Hurd about what Black autistic leadership looks like, and then Kayla Allen uh, is going to talk about Black autistic leadership in a time of DEI erasure, because it's a good time to be asking ourselves, okay, what can we do in a time like this? And so, you know, that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be having all kinds of conversations about how self-care is leadership. We're going to be talking about those things in with people. Scott Forsard is coming back, our good friend, and he's going to talk about how being an author, creating those places for us to have that dialogue, that's part of autistic leadership that we need so desperately. So there's going to be lots of conversations about that sort of thing, and I'll just, if you don't mind, I'm going to say it out loud. But Carol and we're going to be teaming up this summer for my summer self-care series,
Yay, I'm
because
so excited.
yeah, I am too, because I know you do a lot on self-care and I do quite a bit on self-care, and in these times we're
And
in,
we thought, why not do it together?
absolutely,
Better
absolutely,
together, right, Philip?
exactly, yeah. So
We are taking a quick pause in the show so that I can share an upcoming workshop opportunity with you. Then we'll get back to the fabulous conversation with my guest. Have you ever felt the challenge of guiding your team through uncertain times? You're not alone. Imagine transforming your leadership style with grateful leadership. In this upcoming workshop, you will engage in a 3-hour workshop designed for leaders like you. Dive into interactive sessions with case studies and role playing Discover the power of acknowledgement to create a culture of appreciation, and learn to coach your team for breakthrough results. This workshop was created for leaders seeking to enhance their communication and interpersonal skills. Are you ready to lead authentically and inspire your team during times of uncertainty? Find out more at the link in the show notes below, and be sure to use our special discount code to save 50% just for listeners of Beyond Chronic Burnout. Now, back to the conversation. Oh, and I heard a name when you were listing off some upcoming guests that I got really excited about. My good friend Shalise Hurd, she is just amazing. I'm so excited. You're going to have her on the show too. And of course, my absolute, like, I swear if I could claim a brother in the world, and I think you told me this too, it'd be Scott Braysard.
Yeah. I jokingly call him my straight autistic twin brother. We are different sexual orientations, but we do tend to think very closely.
Yes.
And so,
and you both have, really nice little beards. And
well, and please allow me to say Kayla, Alan. I hate that. I'm having trouble. I'm sorry. I'm having trouble pronouncing her name. Oh, Misa. That's it. Sorry. But there, I fixed the name. I hate that. So, okay. Well, where do you want me to go from here?
Okay. As we talk about the future of multidimensional autistic leadership, one of the things that you and I both know is a critical component. It's a core foundational component of leading and being a leader and focusing on leadership. And that's having the energy to even do it. And one of the things that I think you bring a lot of wealth of information and knowledge from all of the amazing conversations that you've had, the incredible guests, but also just your own life experience. Because you're like, I don't know if I could speak to burnout. There's so many of us, I think, that don't even know we've had it. So as we're talking about burnout prevention, I mean, what are some ways that you found people begin to identify burnout, especially if they've had it, for a while and didn't know it?
Well, that's a good question. And, I think that it comes from two things that I've said many times on my podcasts, my own podcast. I've said, one of the most important things you must do is you must become the expert, not an expert, the expert about your own brand, make, and model of autism. And you must become the expert about communicating what that means for you. A friend of mine came up with brand, make, and model. That was Jillian Nelson from the Autism Society of Minnesota. And, she's like, if you think of autistic communication, for example, as like that, if you think of neurotypical conversation, that's like Windows. And then if you think like autistic leadership as being sort of like iOS, they're both languages. They just speak very differently. And, but when it comes to burnout, we all experience it very differently. And there's always there is a possibility that we won't know it's already there. One of the
Unless you take my quiz.
Well, yeah, take the quiz. But also, there's also some things that, we might want to take some time to really do some real thinking, especially in this year when everything is unpredictable. And my one thing that you've seen me say on posting stuff about is that you and I come from a time I know we do when
Don't be telling our age, Philip.
No, but I could tell what generation we're from when I say
Yes.
that we come from the generation where there were lot limited sources of news than there are now. We lived through the days when the newspaper came every day, or you watched the local or national news, or some of these news magazines and all that. That's where you got your information. Now, social media has come along with all of the channels and things that buy news and distribute it according to their buyers' wishes. The point is it comes at us, I say 200, 500 miles an hour on social media. And it always happens. Your friend sees something from a news source, they reshare it. Then somebody else comes along and reshares theirs. And then somebody finds that same news story on a different thing and they reshare. The thing is, when you're reading those, and I find that when I'm reading those, they make me angry. They really make me almost sick to my stomach. Another thing that I've often found that, I don't know about you, but a lot of this really, I find it to limit the amount of things I can listen to, so that even when my husband needs to tell me something, I'm like, I only have so much space to take it in because my brain is full, really.
Oh, yes.
And then the thing is that when you start feeling that tightness in your chest, you start feeling that nervousness in your belly, like you're shaking, and your brain just can't think anymore. It can't take anymore. It can't think anymore. You can't write. You can't speak. You can't function or focus. That's probably a good indication of burnout. That's probably a good indication. You said on my show a few years ago that energy is transferred. And without realizing it, we transfer our energy to whatever it is we're reading. And
Yes.
and there's another thing that needs to be spoken of. When there are campaigns that are ableism and homophobia, transphobia, our trans communities being smacked around literally, internalizing that ableism, internalizing that homophobia is an unavoidable consequence. You can't really ignore it. It just comes in. And so, before you realize it, you're giving your energy to all of that. And you need to turn literal. And this is why I've been saying, if you're finding that social media is just making you more angry, log out, turn it off, close your browsers, close it on your phone. Just close it, turn off the notifications, do it, and just spend some time doing something that starts to put you maybe at a little bit of ease. You know what I found? I found these wonderful videos on YouTube. They're done by some Zen folks. They're these magnificent videos with this calming music, and you see jellyfish going through there, just changing color. You hear the stuff, and it really can. If you sit with it for a while, it can really change your brain, what you're thinking of. But if you're somebody who deals with a lot of sensory input, and that stuff is literally taking over your sensory input, it does. And binge listen to your favorite podcast, Carol's or mine. you know, if exercise is your thing, do some exercising. Uh, there are some who actually need sensory input rather than, and our friend Michelle Markman loves to put herself on the edge of danger because that gives her some of that
Michelle, I love her spirit. She's such an adventurer, right?
I know it. Yeah. And then, I've got one, except for James from the Autism Society of Minnesota. She loves to do things like Cirque du Soleil, bouncing up in the air, twirling herself around and that sort of thing. It feeds her energy. So if you've got things that really feed your energy, knitting or doing something, do it. Spend some time doing it. And one day one of my friends, again, Jillian Nelson, once said, there's one thing about being autistic and having your special interests. I don't think anybody really enjoys it as much as we do, so take some pride in that. Really absorb that love for what it is you love to do. And I've also been saying that for a few years now, but I think we all need our safe spaces, which includes creating the do not disturb signs and putting them on your doors when it's your turn. My joke here is that if the hotels and motels can do it, so can we. You
I
know,
love that.
yeah,
I'm gonna create a digital do not disturb sign, and I'm gonna create a physical do not disturb sign.
you
I
have to do that. Yeah.
yeah, and I think as the week has gone on from last week, and I've seen your postings reminding people, saying, "Hey, give yourself permission to get off social media right now if you need to. Give yourself permission to turn off your notifications." And honestly, one of the best things that we can do is something called what I teach called appreciative rest. And you
Yes.
were talking about it when you were watching the jellyfish, right? So we can have passive appreciative rest where we are observing or seeing something that we are appreciating the beauty in something.
Mhm.
And then we can have that active creative rest, which we did in our Unveiler community this past Sunday. And I've got my coloring book right here where I was coloring and, people were crocheting and we were all doing sort of an active form of rest. And it's amazing what just 5 or 10 minutes, that's it, will help your nervous system regulate. And it just gives our brain that pause. When you were talking about when your brain was just so full, I have auditory processing delay. And when I've listened or I've had too much going on, I've had too much coming into my environment during the day,
Yeah.
we're, we're going to go ahead and just age us right now. Remember Charlie Brown? We were little Charlie Brown's teacher. Wah, 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 wah. That's all I hear when I've had too much of my, and I'll look at my husband, bless his heart. I just love him to death. He is so sweet. And he's telling me about his special interest. And it's usually in the afternoon. And I'll look at him and I go, my ears are not hearing you. All I get is wah, 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 wah. Give me a few minutes to like recharge myself and let's circle back. And then I want to hear what you have to say. But right now I can't even hear it.
No. Mhm. No, 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 and I had to do that with my husband Jason every now and then. I said, I want to listen to you, but right now I just can't. You
Yeah.
know, and a lot of this stuff that's coming at us, like I said, at 500 miles an hour. Like I say, sometimes we just don't realize what it's doing. I've noticed for myself that because my space for taking in information is becoming more limited because of what we're hearing. You know, I have discovered that I'm getting a little shorter sometimes with people more than I want to be. I really don't like to be, and my husband is so great at forgiving me. But there are just sometimes,
Mine too.
yeah, I'm like, I just can't right now. I can't even absorb another thing because I'm angry. I'm frustrated. And the thing is here's one of those things, since we're talking about our advocates, it really can do a number on advocacy burnout. That's something I and a lot of us have actually talked about. And here's one of those things that I'm going to say for your audience here. Um, I, I'm an autistic advocate. Everybody knows that. Um, and so many people, Carol, Scott, and so many, we're autistic advocates. And we think that at them, sometimes we might be tempted to think at those moments we're really at our wits end here, that if we back out somehow we're not interested anymore, we're ignoring whatever's happening. There might be the tendency to think that, but when you turn something off, someone else is turning it on, someone else is sharing stuff, someone else is speaking, someone else is writing a book, someone else is attending a workshop. Every now and then you need to say, somebody else has got to do it for now. I go through this the week after I publish a show. I just have my time. I'm like, okay, I published a show now. I need to rest. I didn't even realize how much it started burning me out in 2022 because I had put out a couple episodes in February and March of that year. And I finally got to a place where I said, do I realize that I have not had a day off to myself in 3 weeks? And I finally said, I'm going to have to, as you said, give myself permission to say, this Thursday and Friday, no anything, just nothing, because I can't. But it took me reaching that point to realize I was there, you know. Um, so even as an autistic advocate, part of your self care is putting it down for a couple days. Actually, putting it down for a couple days a week if necessary. You have to. You really have to. Because boy, it can really absorb your it can absorb your gut, you know, and it can actually affect your physical health if you're not careful.
Oh, 100%.
No,
Philip,
uh,
I'm curious for you to kind of share what self-care for autistics can look like, because you and I are both like, look, the surface level stuff, putting some cucumbers on your eyeballs, getting a massage, that's all nice, but that's not going to keep you at a burnout long term. So what are some things that you have found over the years, because you've had so many beautiful conversations around what self-care can look like and be for us? What are some of those things that you have found are really great ways for us to self-care?
well, first of all, what I share here today may not work for other autistics. So if that's the case, that's fine. And my go-to person for self-care has been Becca Laurie Hector, who, if you haven't heard Becca Laurie Hector, you need to, because she is I call her the self-care specialist. I interview all the time. And one of the things she likes to say is that I think a lot of us autistics, before we knew, people were telling us that we're selfish and that we're just always concentrating on ourselves and that sort of thing. And so, get out of yourselves, get interested, whatever. I think a lot of us have heard that. Your self-care is important because of the environments we live in, where we're not really accepted, where our right to exist is being highly questioned. Um, and the thing is, what self-care means is, instead of focusing on everybody else, you focus on yourself. And I'm going to say in this part, if you don't focus on yourself, I don't think we can really help anyone else. You know, we like to pretend that we've got it all together. We like to say, okay, I've got everything figured out. But you and I also know that point is, after you've been identified, you're like, do I really know myself at all?
Oh, the identity crisis that happens. It is real. It is
It
part
is
of the
real. It is
processing
real.
phase.
And it goes through
Yeah.
that point where, you're like, that sort of thing. And this is where the Autism Society of Minnesota has come in for me, because, and I didn't find them until, well, maybe 5, 6 years later, after I got my identification. Sorry, gotta be careful with that. And I went to one of their support groups for autistics who are LGBT, and we were talking about how certain things are affecting us. I heard people saying things that I wanted to say, but I didn't know how to say. I heard one say, "You know what gets me really angry? The number of neurodivergent, not sorry, the number of neurotypical people who are trying to tell us how to behave or speak, but they're not giving us any examples of how they do it so wonderfully." And so that's true. That can be true. So this is where I repeat what I've said before. You must become the expert about your own brain, make and model of autism. That's one of your first self-care goals.
We're taking a quick pause in the show so that I can share a new Whittington Wellbeing membership opportunity with you. Then we'll get back to the fabulous conversation with my guest. Feeling drained before the week even begins? You're not alone. As an autistic woman, I faced the same Sunday evening dread, those horrible Sunday scaries. My to-do list felt like a mountain I could never climb, but I discovered a way to transform my Sundays and ultimately my entire week. Introducing Alignment Sundays, a live community journey guiding you out of exhaustion and into aligned energy. Each Sunday session begins with a guided meditation to align with your higher self first. Access these meditations anytime in our online portal throughout your week so that you stay aligned. I'll personally take you through the energy appraisal guide in the session to help you navigate your week with clarity. Imagine ending your week with energy to spare. Join me and let's turn Sunday afternoons into a time of calm clarity for the week ahead. Learn more at the link in the show notes below and get started this Sunday. Now, back to the conversation.
I had our friend Angela Kingdon on this past December, and she said one of the most powerful things, self-care. One of the first goals of self-care is you must protect your peace. Autistics, we surrender that without even realizing we surrendered it. And returning, we transfer our energy into that. So self-care is about returning that energy back to yourself and saying, I have a right to some peace. I don't have to be available 24/7 to other people. I need to, one of the suggestions that I've heard is to make that self-care part of your regular daily activity, really. But it's also things like, I need to withdraw right now. Or for some people, your self-care is that you do need people. Some autistics find the more people they're around when they're feeling burned out, the more people they're interacting with, the better they feel. If that's your method of self-care, then that's your method of self-care. But here's one of those things that, again, it's difficult to do. When the people you love who are with you, whether that be your parents, family, spouses, aunts, uncles, and whatnot, you need to rehearse saying the word no.
Oh, I'm telling you, I cannot emphasize how the transformation, and I love that you shared this, and I'm going to invite everybody in the audience that's listening to play a little bit with this because I believe play is very important.
Yeah.
And I want you to just take the word no and I want you to play saying it in different voices, in different tones, in different ways. And it's really fun because you will feel when you say no in your body.
Mhm.
And when you first start saying no, a lot of times it's kind of timid. It's like, no, or no, 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 in kind of like apologetic way. And then it'll transform and you'll get real bold and be like, nope. And be like, hell no. And it kind of grates. And then it's just, you get to this embodied, very place of leadership. And we're just like,
Yes.
no, without excuse, without explanation. You can own it because you feel safe to
Mhm.
say no.
Yeah. And quite frankly, you deserve your safe place to say no. You owe
Yes.
that to yourself. You owe it to yourself to be in a place where you say, I cannot have that conversation now. This is one thing that I often run into is that, I've just woken up and someone's bringing me the news of the day. I'm like, not now. No, no, my brain is not ready to receive all that. Keep it for later. You know, um, you know, the one thing about saying no is, what I like to talk about a little bit is we autistics often get accused of not keeping everybody else's boundaries. And what I have come to understand, and please feel free to add to this if you like,
Oh,
is that
you get me. I'm with you on this one.
the
Keep
point is
going.
that one of the reasons why we may have trouble keeping other people's boundaries is if we do not make some for ourselves. Often it's getting that reply means I have not set my boundaries. And you know exactly what happens when autistics start setting your boundaries. We get told,
Castle
"Oh,
walls, baby.
you have no business having a boundary like that." You know what? Yes, I do. My boundaries do not have to look like yours. You know, my boundaries can be different. Um, you know, I know that uh, you know, if I'm around in a bright colored room, it's very difficult for me. I know that if I'm watching, when I watch television shows, like I can't take violence. I cannot watch anything where an animal is being harmed. I know those things about me, so I make myself that boundary. That's not going to happen, you know. And so
I am so
you
glad it's not just me, Philip, because I'm the same way. I'm like, I cannot watch that. I am so physically affected by that. I do
yeah,
not watch those kind of things.
no, and the thing is, I mean, I like a good a murder thing. Like I'm a big fan of Law and Order, where they're solving cases and that sort of thing. But I just can't take guns everywhere and just no, that's just not me. But you're the one who knows that. Each you're the one who knows that best. And if that's something that works for you, great. Indulge, enjoy, and you know, excuse me, keep playing it. But if you can't, that's okay. One of my guests, Darren Howard, talked about this thing to do with toxic masculinity. We men are supposed to, do those things because we're men. We're supposed to take it on the chin, that sort of thing. Well, and this is where I'm going to say it, and some people are going to, as long as we're talking about genders here, I have come to the conclusion for myself that autistics in general, regardless of your sexual orientation, regardless of your gender identity, we are gender nonconforming, period. It's unavoidable, you know. Uh, and so, I've had many women who have been on my show who have said, "That's interesting you said that, because I was accused of being a tomboy when I was young." I've also
I
seen,
was, and
yeah,
most people would be like, "You're so girly." I'm like, "Yeah, but I wasn't when I was younger, and I'm still am." Like, it's weird. Like, I went through a whole thing.
yeah,
I'm 50, and I think so many of us do this because I've had tons of conversations over the years with other autistic people who are speaking to exactly and expressing and sharing exactly what you're talking about. It's like, I don't know exactly what it is to be masculine or feminine. And sometimes I don't even feel like I really have a
mhm.
gender necessarily, or I don't register genders sometimes. I don't know. I mean, I thought for a long time it was just me. And the more I've talked to people, the more that is just part of our autistic culture, as my friend Don Prince Hughes says.
Yeah, it's also part of our gender conditioning in society too. Um, you know, Speaking of autistic men, I know a lot of autistic men, even straight men, even men who are cisgender men, who are quite emotionally sensitive about various things. And of course, society says that men are, again, supposed to take it on the chin, button up, and just deal with it. But a lot of the autistic men that I encounter, they're quite emotionally vulnerable, and you know I think it's important. Part of self care is just important. Be true to who you are. You know, you don't. This is one of those things that I think Becca Laurie Hector and I have also said. You don't owe anybody an apology for taking care of yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And don't run around saying I'm sorry for every little thing because there's nothing to be sorry about.
No, there isn't. And the thing is we've been taught. Okay, if you inconvenience somebody, you say I'm sorry. I still do it. But the thing is that you don't owe anybody an apology. In fact, sometimes you have to say, I don't owe you an explanation. Just leave me be. You know, I mean,
I love that. I mean, that's part of leadership, self
it's part.
leadership.
It's part. This is what Becca Laurie Hector and I are going to talk about coming in March. But we're going to talk about self care is personal autistic leadership, and that's what we're talking about today. Leadership is also taking care of yourself. It's personal, and you know, um, you need to do it. There's no, you have to do it. I say you have to because, again, it can really affect your mentality. It can affect your
If you
physical
don't,
ability.
you end up in a ghost pepper level 5 burnout where you're so hot you're not, and your body shuts down.
Absolutely. And I think you were the one who said, not only is the tank empty, the tank's starting to rust, right?
It's starting to vacuum in on itself.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
we're still trying to go back there and pull the reserves, and there's no reserves. So we're just like this. We've got this tank that's that's crushing in on itself. The vacuum. We've created a vacuum.
Yeah. Actually, one of the things that I like to say about a lot of us autistics, we start out the day in a deficit. We've already got that deficit of energy going on. Okay. For some autistics, just getting out of bed and walking to the bathroom, that's enough. sometimes, you know, and it just adds one thing on top of another. So, um, you know, what we're talking about is self-care, to start taking some of those things off and, starting to focus on what's important to you. Um, you know, um, Part of the reason why I say that you must be the expert about your own brand, make, and the model of autism. If you don't know how autism affects you, it's hard for you to advocate for it because you don't know what you're advocating for. This is where you love to talk about, um, you can one of your boundaries can be, I do not talk in person first language, and I don't. One of my boundaries is, don't even mention the functioning labels to me. Just don't even do it. You know, um, the one thing that, in today's autistic moment, among the things that I'm actually highly defensive, actually. But I get requests in my emails every now and then for someone to post something about children, including a couple of years ago. I had one who spoke the poison from the fruit from the poisonous tree. They wanted me to post that, well, it's been medically proven that taking acetaminophen causes women to give birth to children with autism or ADHD. And I said, there is no way I am going to help you promote that nonsense. I had a spiritual director.
Oh, mind blown at some
Yeah.
of the stuff, right?
I had a spiritual director once who gave me some really great words. He said, you know why nonsense is so popular? I said, tell me. He said, because too many people listen to it and believe it. That's why. And the thing is there's way too much of it. And one of the things that autistics are going to have to do in this day and age, because we're already having our identities questioned by a certain individual who is now in his Senate confirmation hearings, and he's one who believes and who has spoken about, again, the vaccines cause autism and all that. And, you know, um, I know our time is getting close, but I want to share a story with all of you that came in one of my Autistic Voices Roundtable discussions, if I may, Carol. Uh, I led one.
Absolutely.
I led one that was about the dangers of medical myths, and in that in that in that one, Nicole Whiting, she is from the UK. She's actually doing some studies about for in psychology for herself, but she shared the story of a survey that was done. It was a survey to look at the morality of autistic people, and basically what it was, they picked a group of young people from age 14 to 25 who were neurotypical, forgive me, and another group who were autistics. And what it was is that they were going to ask somebody to do a really horrible thing for a lot of money. And trigger warning, this is going to hit some of you hard. Okay. But the question was, if we give you a large sum of money, will you go out and kill all the kittens and cats and strays and everything to reduce the stray pet population? Well, the majority of non-autistics answered, yeah, give me the money. I'll go do it. The majority of autistics said, even for all the money in the world, there is no way you're going to get me to go out and do that. And then Nicholas says, now what do you suppose was their conclusion as a result of that, that whole thing? And I said, tell me. She said, their conclusion was that the autistics were broken because they lacked self-interest. I looked at it.
Oh my Lord. I remember reading this, and the first time I read this, I think I was gobstopped into absolute silence.
I just, I mean, Carol, how many times are you and I questioned about how self-absorbed we are? We get told, oh, you don't talk about anything about yourself. You're narcissistic, whatever. And they're saying that we lack self-interest. I'm like, gee, you know,
Because
and
we wouldn't take the money, but our moral code was so that we did not agree with killing the animals. I'm
yeah,
sorry, there
but
is such a huge disconnect in how that gets flipped around to still make us the bad guy
well, because they're
or
certainly
girl.
not going to publish the news that they think that autistic people have a higher morality than non-autistics.
Oh, no
No
way.
way
That
would
ain't
they
gonna
publish it,
happen.
you know?
But see, that's the kind of stuff that I have a real problem with the way that some studies are run.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they're most always done to satisfy, the medical experts and whatnot. And that's why when I first started my show, the one thing, and this was one of those things that, when the business folks said, go out and see what kind of competition you've got. Well, I went out and I said, I saw all kinds of shows about the new treatment that they're offering, the new meds, super meds that are going to do what that, but I never saw anything at that time that was about autistic adults that we're hearing it from our points of view. Okay. And so today's Autistic Moment, a podcast for autistic adults by an autistic adult, and that is me. I am giving my guests, the autistics, the opportunity to say, this is how I see it. And I'm not going to tell you, you have no right to say that. No, you know what your experiences are. And the best experts about being autistic are autistics, not the studies by the professional statistics, statisticians and all that. So that's something I would say as part of the closing. But um you know this time of leadership is a time for us to turn some of these things that are happening to us and become proactive. And I'm gonna say one last thing that was very difficult for Jason and I to do. We, ever since we met 16 years ago, we have been involved in the work for marriage equality. We have been engaged in that work for LGBT equality and equal rights protections. And we heard that there's a group of people who have already asked the Supreme Court to please overturn the rulings that would change all that, which was really hard for us to hear. And so we said, our next duty is going to be very hard. We're going to have to go in and draft our wills, our powers of attorney, our healthcare directives. And I've actually got a clause. I've got a clause in mine that says that, one that says that Jason is my spouse, and the other says, if unavailable, Jason is my domestic partner. And that was so disconcerting because we're so happy together. We've been together a long time, and when we got that get married, we just went for it, and we've never regretted it. So to hear that, that was just realize we have to do that just in case. It was very difficult, but it was proactive to say, I'm not going to give them the power to dismiss our marriage without us having something to say. And so, with what's going on with autistics and all our intersectional communities, and they include people of color, they include a lot of us who are multiply neurodivergent, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, all, you know what? This is a time for us to be proactive. Invite some of the intersectional communities to our table to talk and listen very carefully. But it's also a time by which we have to decide, are we just going to close up and quit? Or are we going to take a stance such as self-care? We know people are beating up on our right to exist. I'm going to take some time to say, I exist, if not to you, at least to myself. And from that, we want to exist to the rest of. But you and I have discovered, like, when we become engaged in the work of autistic advocacy, we find friends. We find people who say, "Get me on board." You know what I mean? So it's
There
definitely
is
worth it.
power in togetherness.
There's power in numbers. There's power in yourself, but the leadership begins really with knowing yourself, taking care of yourself, and finding the people you can advocate with. And it's difficult times, and we need to start saying all these things that we've accomplished over these last 4 or 5 years. We're not just going to let them disappear. I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to look after myself if I feel burned out. I'm going to turn to someone like Carol Jean Whittington to help me get through that burnout. I'm going to turn to somebody and listen to somebody talk about self-care. I'm going to turn and listen to someone else of an intersectional identity talk about, as a transgender person, and let me say, the overlap of the transgender community and the autistic community is real. It
Yes.
must,
Yes, it
and
is.
right now, it's not just the transgender folks who are really being hit hard. It's the autistic community too. And the thing is that we really need to be, there for them and saying, you are who you are to me, and just because someone has said that non-binary people do not exist, we're going to say yes, they do. They're our friends,
Yeah.
and you're not just going to dismiss them from me. But and last but not least, but Devin Price, he blows me away. But you know what? Autistics are the first people to use their strengths to say no. He says pathological demand avoidance. So we are the first people to say, I'm not going to follow that unjust rule. I am not going to be used as a tool of oppression. I am not going to be somebody's play ball. Even if that means withdrawing and say, doing that self-care. Yeah, go for it. Do it. And
That's been wonderful.
yeah.
You've had so many great insights, Philip, today. And if you've enjoyed this conversation and you would really like to step into the future of multidimensional autistic leadership, please go check out today's Autistic Moment. Join the conversations that Philip is going to be hosting throughout 2025 with an incredible panel of advocates all along the way. And make sure you join him this summer for Self-Care Summer, because he does it every summer. And it's just amazing and so much fun. Thank you for being here today.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
for being part of the community and the conversation. Be sure you go down in the show notes, click on the link to go check out Philip and today's Autistic Moment. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for being here. It's been quite a ride. Energy mastery, let's turn the tide. Top shelf guests, dropping wisdom bombs. Join us next week, where the energy's strong. Beyond chronic.